morning. Come on in. Thank you for joining us on one of our monthly all-in forums. We've been doing these throughout this church year on the second Sunday of each month, trying to feature a different ministry or area or effort within the church. And we're thrilled today to be able to hear more about the work of our Envision task force and get an update, share an update with all of you about what's been happening related to that. I am Janet Dellery. I'm currently serving as clerk of session, and we have John McAllister, Kim Spivey, and Jordan Schriefer with us today. They were all are and continue to be part of the Envision task force. So will you join me in prayer? Loving God, on this Palm Sunday, as we wave palm branches, we remember your triumphant but humble entry in Jerusalem on a donkey. Prepare our hearts this Holy Week to walk your journey of joy, suffering, and victory. Let us recognize you and all the emotions and reminders of your sacrificial journey. In this next hour, be with us here at Covenant Presbyterian Church as we seek to discern and act on your vision for this congregation to follow you with faith and courage today and always. In your name we pray. Amen. So again, we thought we would kind of go back a little bit first and remind ourselves of what this Envision process was, and then hear about what has happened over the last several months as we've tried to take the feedback and the recommendations of that task force and make them part of the life of our congregation. So to start with, Kim, would you remind us of how our Envision Covenant initiative came to be and kind of the intent behind it?
Sure. Thanks, Janet. Good morning. Thank y'all for being here. So back in January of 2023, session went on retreat, which is our tradition at Covenant. And the focus of that retreat was to talk about our church in the post-COVID era. How had we been impacted? Kind of where were we? And in what ways was our world different and potentially calling for us to not be turn on a dime different, but to be really aware of how we needed to continue to live into our vision, but in this current context after we had all been through this unprecedented and unanticipated and impossible to prepare for collective experience. And they talked about the fact that it had been a number of years since we had had a coalescing experience across the breadth of our congregation. And the last time was really our capital campaign work, which took place a number of years ago. And they said, it's time for us to refresh ourselves in terms of our understanding of God's call for this particular community of faith. And then they went on to talk about how, do we do a traditional strategic plan? And in their wisdom, which I think turned out to be brilliant, they said, no, that doesn't feel like what's called for. And so they commissioned a broadly inclusive season of praying, discerning, and listening for the purpose of gathering input and information and inspiration for our way forward over the next few years. And that was the charge that was handed to the Envision Covenant team, which John and Jordan and I were members of, as well as several other folks. And then we spent several months thinking about, okay, how do we do that? How do we take that not super specific charge and turn it into something very tangible and specific? And that's how it was born. And the thing I really want to point out about the decision to charge us to do a collective visioning versus a traditional strategic plan is it's allowed us to have this experience of organically sharing all this information and input and inspiration across staff leadership, across lay leadership. Strategic plans tend to be a small number of people working on something. This has really been a permeating the spirit of every aspect of our life, every committee, every um, gathering, every group. And therefore, we've got collective ownership of it versus sort of narrow ownership. Yep.
You. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the steps and the process that the group went through to make sure that it was that broadly inclusive process that was part of your charge?
Yeah, I'll get us started. So we met with all of the different ministries here at Covenant. And we had different members of our team go and hold listening sessions to all of the different ministries, so that every corner and pocket at Covenant was touched and had a voice. And we got their input. We also put it out there to different small groups, circles, all of the life groups that we have going on. We said we will come to you. We will host a listening session with you. I did one with the young adult community, and we did those, and then we also had an open forum. Those were held here in the fellowship hall. So it was in that way we were able to get over. I think we got over 300 people attended in one way or another. We also went out to the Sharon, which was a really great experience as well.
Well, we also went externally. We talked to our mission partners, to our neighbors. We reached out to the hospital of the Duke Endowment, which is now down the street, stuff like that. So we made an effort to go externally as well. And I would just like to say, as from my perspective of being on the task forces, I think it really shows a strength of an organization to be willing to do what we did, to say we're going to go out to as many people as we can think of and ask them to tell us what are we doing well and what do we need to work on. So I agree with Kim that we really didn't need to redo the strategic plan, but being where we are as a church, to be willing to say, tell us what you think, I think that shows that we got a good foundation as a strong organization.
We also had an email inbox, and we invited people to send us notes if they weren't able to attend a listening session. And we heard from dozens of people that way. And we held a listening session with middle and high school youth as well, and also reached out to our preschool and CDC parents. So, I mean, we tried very hard to leave sort of no stone unturned in terms of inviting voice and inviting participation. And we're thrilled with, how many folks showed up and were involved in the process.
There any experiences from those sessions that really surprised you or that have really stuck with you? Any moments that kind of took your breath away as you were going through those sessions?
I think for me, Jordan mentioned that we went out to the Sharon. I always say Sharon Towers, but we had a great discussion out there. It was really a lot of fun. We had really good turnout, and it was kind of a no holes barred, you know, get some feedback. And the fun thing about that was the level of interest in what we were doing. And what I heard from those folks, and also the table I was at the elder dinner that fall, what I heard was the strong desire of our oldest members that the next generation step up and be ready to lead. So, when I see people like Jordan, participating and leading, and Grace and others that are active. Our older members are really excited about that, and they really appreciate that. And they see that as just the church being strong. And the other thing I'll say, I learned at that session from several of our most senior women members was that apparently when they were youths at Covenant, the boys at Myers Park Prez's youth group were cuter than they were at Covenant. So a couple of them said they actually went over to Myers Park, found their husbands, and brought them back to Covenant. So that was one of the more important things I learned in the envisioning process.
Kind of going off of that, well, not the second part, but one thing that has continued to stick with me is this theme of desire for intergenerational relationships. And I think we get that with the kickoff lunch, the potluck that we've had the last couple of years. But as we were holding listening sessions, I got to go with Kim. We kind of used her Bible study as a guinea pig group. But to be able to sit in a room with these women who have like raised me and hear how Covenant has impacted their faith journeys and how Covenant has impacted their life, and to be all together and discern what's next, and to hear their desires, same thing, John, for those intergenerational relationships, and also for their voices to not be left out. So anyway, it was just beautiful. I had the opportunity to do that and a few more with some of my mom's friends. And so it's really special to be part of a community who is willing to put in the effort to do something like this.
We talked around our planning table and the Envision team about wanting the listening season, the information, the input gathering to itself potentially be a transformational experience of faith. And we got to see that. We had about 30 facilitators that were willing to step up and be trained and lead these listening sessions. And we heard stories of facilitators meeting each other for the first time and forging friendships. And we heard people talk about just how beautiful it was to sit around a table and really see and listen to and hear each other. So the building of connection was really powerful. And one story that will always stay with me is I had the opportunity to, along with a couple of other folks, to speak with Liz Clayson Kelly from Roof Above. And Liz told a story about how the diversity and richness of worship experience at Covenant actually helps them be stronger as an organization. She said, because worship life at Covenant is so vibrant and it's diverse, and there are worship opportunities that appeal to the range of people's personal proclivities, styles, ways that we're touched spiritually. And she said, therefore, that has more and more people on campus at Covenant on a Sunday morning. And more people then hear about us when there's a mention about Roof Above, or they see a check presentation or something. And she said, I can tell you that worship at Covenant has had a direct impact on the health of our particular organization. I would have never, obviously we're outreach partners with them, right? But I would have never put our worship life and a community partner strength together. So that was a really powerful story.
Thank you. So we had this rich season of listening, and then it was time for the task force to try to distill all of that feedback into some recommendations that went into the report that was presented and approved by session. Can you talk a little bit kind of about first that kind of process of distilling it, and then highlight some of the main takeaways and recommendations that came out of the listening sessions?
Will you talk a little bit about the archival process? Because you were our chief archivist.
Oh, yes. So we had all the questions, and all of our incredible facilitators took studious notes at all of these different listening sessions. And so the trick was then, okay, well, where do we put it all? And so we uploaded it onto Google Drive, if you all are familiar with that. So folks would scan it in or email me their PDFs, and we put it in one big folder on the drive up in the cloud. And so then when it was time to figure out what we were going to recommend, we had to go through all of those documents, all of those listening sessions that we had. So our committee kind of broke up and took a different section. Like I took all of the ones that related to education, and and then we looked for different themes. What stood out? What were those things that we kept seeing over and over and over again? And Kim led us through a process of, it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen over one or two meetings. It was a couple of months of discerning what it was. What were we hearing from all of this input? And that's kind of what led us to our recommendations.
We also made sure to not only capture themes that we heard over and over again, but to also capture unique ideas, unique voices, unique expressions that, because we didn't want to mediate to just the center. And so it was a lot of hours, a lot of prayer, a lot of discernment, a lot of work on the part of this team. And we knew we needed to give something to session that would be usable. So we wrote a report. It's a 12-page report. And it had two primary sections. The first was relative to our vision statement, strengths to continue to build on. What are those things that seem to be at the heart of the vibrancy of this community of faith? And then areas of opportunity. And oftentimes the strengths had another side to the coin. For example, a welcoming church, lots of examples of that people talked about how they were welcomed the first time they were on campus and the warmth that they felt. And as we grow, we also know that we have people that after that first initial warm experience are not always getting actively invited in, which is the next step that we know is important for people to feel included in this life of faith and not feel like you have to have a secret handshake, to know how to be part of our community. So the first section was strengths to build on that were important to Mark. These are important. This is part of our fulfillment of God's call and our vision, and then areas of opportunity. And then we highlighted a list of specific strategic areas of focus that we felt were important for us to all pay attention to. And I'll briefly outline these for you. By the way, this report is on Covenant's website, and it's pretty easy to find. So if you just go and find the Envision updates, this report is still out there. So the recommended areas of strategic focus were dynamism of worship, something we certainly already have, but it was clearly important for us to continue to focus energy there. Discernment and action, continued discernment and action around our outreach and impact in the world, specifically exploring constantly the question of where is God calling us next? And so, for example, the environment for many of our local and global mission partners has changed dramatically in a short period of time. How do we continue to be in partnership and stand with our partners? Avery County and the impact of Hurricane Helene has been a wonderful example of that, but we need to constantly be focusing there. A discernment process, ongoing discernment process around our call relative to diversity, inclusion, and equity and justice, because that context is continuously changing. Opportunities to integrate across ministry areas so that, things are not just education, just mission and outreach, because that's how we have transformational experiences. Equipping a culture of welcoming and engagement that results in more consistency in people's experience and has us build on the strength of the incredible work Laura Borelli does, but to share that responsibility across our community. To intentionally create connection opportunities across the breadth of our church so that as we grow, we still feel like a community. We don't feel dispersion. And investing and expanding into small groups, because we heard over and over again that that's the connective tissue for people. And then quantifying a plan to better operationalize the level of support, engagement for our children and youth. And that, by the way, is not we have incredible staff. They are doing amazing things. But we are experiencing a time where we have more children and youth active in this church and fewer volunteers involved in our children and youth programs. So those were the sort of, let's really hone in on these strategic areas. But then we also shared out with all the ministry leadership teams and other groups what we heard relative to their areas of focus along these themes of strengths to build on and areas of opportunity.
Thank you. So the report came out and then it was time to kind of put this into action across all the different ministries and teams within the church. And I know the task force put in a lot of time in meeting with those different groups. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how we took it from a report to affecting change throughout the church and in all the different ministries?
I think some specific examples probably is the best way to talk about that. Do you want to?
Sure. So, like Kim said, we gave the recommendations to the different ministry teams, and they kind of from there have cultivated different goals for their year, and what their year is going to look like and what their work is going to focus on, and that is all relative to the Envision report. Something specifically that came out of Envision was this need for more volunteers. So we created the incubation team, the education incubation team, and this started last summer. And I brainstormed a list with Grace, and we asked for different members of the congregation across all levels of engagement with education. So we had we have empty nesters who have been very active in the church or in the youth program before, but had been mentors of different kind and advisors. We had current youth parents on the committee, as well as young moms who have young children that are getting ready to come up through. And so the idea of this incubation team, similar to Envision, was to figure out, okay, where do we go next? What are we missing? How do we provide support to our incredible youth staff, our education staff, so that we can continue to grow this community? Because the kids love coming to church. It is evident in the numbers that we see especially middle and high school youth, and across the parking lot too in the Ed Wing. So we reached out to other churches that are similar to Covenant's size, both in Charlotte and in the Southeast, and we asked them about what their volunteerism looked like. We asked friends, family, other people, what makes you say yes? What makes you say no? So just to figure out what is it that make people volunteer and spend their time. And what we found was it's all about that invitation, that personal invitation, which is something I think we heard in Envision as well. So making that personal invitation and getting something out of it too, not just checking a box, but it's not transactional. It's transformational. It is, it's a transformational experience of faith, not only for the children and youth, but also for the adults in their life who are putting in the time to come and be with them. So the work of the committee was really, how do we take this information and put it into next steps for the education ministry? And what we came up with was creating this ask event where we bring in everybody that the kids want to they want to be part of their life, their faith journeys, and then training them, making sure that they have the right that they know what they're getting into. Because a lot of times people feel like they're not equipped, but we all are. We are all called and equipped for that work. And then also just remembering how to thank them and be walking alongside them. So that has all kind of just been passed off to education, and we're in the process of planning that very first Ask event, which is going to be really exciting, and I think hopefully a way to build that community of support. And as was in the book, Spiritual Child, I think it's referenced the field of love. So continuing to build that field of love for our children and youth here at Covenant.
Yeah, thank you. So at our most recent
Can I add
session,
one thing? And I
Yeah.
assume this came out of y'all's work, but even before this Ask event, I noticed that this past week, there was an email that went out to people who were on the distribution list for our third quarter season, which is people 55 to 70, I think. And it was this idea of, let's have people in this connection group sign up to teach Sunday school for children the third Sunday of every month. So it's very targeted, it's very intergenerational, it's meeting a need that we have. So I mean, that's a tangible example of something that's come out of all of this.
Thank you.
So at our March session meeting, we had an opportunity. There were big strips of white paper all over this area with all the different ministries. And we were asked to just take a few minutes to walk around and jot down where we had seen Envision come to life over the last several months. And I know one of the things that was really powerful for me was, one, people sometimes had a hard time deciding which sheet to put it on, which I think is a testament to some progress that we've made around some of the cross ministry work. And then the other one, I was sitting right behind me, was finance and personnel. And they were full of ways that Envision had touched sort of what might be perceived as sort of back office type operations. So John, I didn't know if you could talk a little bit to how you've seen Envision things even pop up in personnel and some other kind of not forward-facing ministries, but the ways that personnel has supported the Envision work as well.
Yeah, I think as personnel chair and personnel, I mean, we're always going to be focused on, we want this to be a good place to work. We want a strong work environment. obviously you want to be competitive with your pay and benefits and all those types of things. And we heard a lot in the Envision report about retention. And I think those are things that it's a good reminder for us in personnel that we need to be focused on that it's important for our staff, but also that that's an expectation that our congregation has. I think another example where we in personnel gave some thought to and I think took some specific action was around diversity. We heard a lot in the feedback we've got in the envisioning process about the importance of diversity to our congregation. And you think, okay, well, what does personnel have to do with that? Is it, it's more than just having a diverse workforce. We stepped back and thought about that, and so what does diversity mean, and how do we measure that? And I know broadly within the how to approach the envisioning report, there was talk across ministries about, does that just mean, having more diversity in who's sitting in our pews on Sundays? And, again, how do you measure that, and how long does that take? And so we gave it some thought from that perspective. And I personally think, that maybe there's a little bit of vanity from us to say, well, we're just going to have all these different people come to our church. Maybe people don't want to leave the church they grew up in, or maybe people where they're comfortable. And for us just to sit back and say, well, that's our goal and that's our measuring stick, is probably not thinking broadly enough. And we thought of it from the perspective of, increasing diversity here really means broadening and strengthening our relationships with others, with other congregations, with other cultures, with other faiths. And that had a lot to do with our deciding to create the new associate pastor for congregational life. And one of the important objectives for this new position is to to reach out at that installed pastor level to other churches, and to start to create stronger relationships. And again, race is important there, but other cultures and other faiths, probably we have a real opportunity to strengthen those relationships. And, if we're successful at doing that, then diversity will follow that. I mean, I think relationships is what diversity is based on. And becoming more diverse is really based on those relationships. And I think other parts of our strengths will grow: mission and outreach. I mean, this new position's it's not mission, it's relationships. But if we strengthen those relationships, then our ability to do more in mission will follow that. I mean, I think Mandy could see planning some type of mission trip with another church, where if you can develop those relationships, you can do that. So I would say that goal of more diversity was a key part of us creating this new associate pastor position. And we got a good search committee working on that, and hopefully there'll be some news around that soon. But I think there's a real strong opportunity for us to grow through that type of position.
What are some other examples that you've seen or heard about that you think are great examples of how Envision has already come to life in our congregation?
I'm just thinking back to what you mentioned, Janet, when we had the sheets of paper, and I mean, the papers were full of all these different ideas. And what's standing out to me surrounding the dynamic worship realm is all of the artists in residence that we've had recently. And this was right after Ben and Tamika had just been here, and if you had the opportunity to go to 9:30 worship and 11, I mean, if you were here at all during February, I think you were probably touched by that. So that's just one example that was fresh.
And I think in all honesty, we don't want to look at this as kind of a one and done. You know, we did the process, we got the report, we've had a year of implementing some of the recommendations. This really should be a foundation for how all our ministries are looking at things going forward, you know, until we decide to do it again.
Right.
So hopefully people aren't checking the box and say, okay, well, we made this change based on the Envision report and now we're done. You know, because then we won't have used it to its fullest if we do that. So I hope this time next year we'll still be talking about some changes and some new ideas and some things that we can go, you know, that was a good idea the Envisioning report gave us. It may take more than 12 months to implement all these things.
Couple of things that I've actually learned about recently. One thing that I thought about this morning in preparation was 12 months ago, Jordan and John and I and other members of the Envision team, we were experts on Envision. We knew that feedback. We had studied it. We prayed over it. We
I couldn't
had
access
done the report.
Jordan's files. I couldn't have figured out how to do that. So.
So she would send them to you. So you got them. Anyway, yeah, I've got so many stories about how the team just brought their gifts forward, and it was a remarkable experience. But we now are not experts on it because the Spirit has done this, and it has sparked creative thinking, and it has dutifully informed and sort of spiritually inspired people around covenant. And so a few fun things that I've recently learned about. I know this summer there was a pen pal program for young adults and older members of our church, and that has fostered intergenerational connection and relationship and support. The engagement ministry has just recently started a program to pair new members, if they would like to, with someone who's been at Covenant for a while to help ease that invitation into the life of the church. I mean, and there are many examples of things that are coming not just out of ministry groups, but out of life group leaders, et cetera. So now the work is, and this is Peony's, one of Peony's, our planning and evaluation board, which is Covenant sort of standing strategic planning group. It's been in existence for decades here. And it allows us, I think, to respond pretty quickly to things. One of the focus of the Planning and Evaluation Board this year, areas of focus, we're looking back at the Envision report. We got the input from session at the March dinner. You know, where are we seeing signs of life that align with the input and message that we got from the congregation, and where might there be some areas where we need to make sure that we're having conversations to influence more focus and more creative thinking and more forward work. So that's kind of where we are today.
Yeah, I think one word that kind of came to mind when we were looking at all of that was that we seem to today be maybe a more nimble church. And I think a lot of it is kind of because of that spirit now of being willing to try new things, branch out, reach out to different groups and make different connections, and sort of a freedom to dream maybe a little bit bigger and to look at ways that we can, you know, more fully embrace our vision apart from, you know, committees and silos and ministries, and think big and think broad, and then be free to react when the world needs us. in a more easier to do way than maybe before. We had all gone through this process of, like, anytime you think and you dream, you have ideas and feel a little bit of freedom to run with them a little bit. So it's been really exciting to see how the church has done that over the last few months. So what's happening now? How can the congregation, how can we continue to support the work of the Envision Task Force?
I talked about planning and evaluation board's work right now to kind of assess where we are, and the ministry leadership teams are, going through their process of 2025 goals, and that were many of which were informed by the Envision report. I think one of the big things we also need to do is to look at this in light of current context. The world around us is always changing. There's been some rapid fire change recently, and that's an important part of what P&E is doing this year. And so it's really just to continue to keep this alive. I work with a lot of organizations and companies on strategic work, and I can't tell you how many strategic plans end up in the bottom of somebody's desk drawer with like 3 strategies haven't been worked on, but the other, 6 not. And so there are a lot of people around the church who are working to keep this alive and relevant and update the context so that it can continue to be a point of inspiration for us and a kind of a beacon down the road.
And I would say, keep the ideas and thoughts coming. I mean, if you have a thought about the church's strengths and weaknesses, call Janet. No, reach out to any of us. I think,
Anybody on
yeah,
session.
we don't necessarily have to wait to do this again, or you don't have to wait
Right.
to have somebody get a group together to ask how we're doing. If you got a thought, share it. I mean, that's how we'll work and be even stronger.
And being here this morning is, so, with your interest and curiosity, and it's super helpful.
And to your point, and maybe Kim and Grace, even you can share a little bit more about this, but we've, one thing that's bubbling up right now and is kind of going through the process is thinking about how we can care for God's creation a little bit more. And so when an idea or when an area of need or concern comes up, right, that kind of gets routed through P&E, and then a group gets formed to talk about it a little bit more. And so that can happen for any number of kind of areas, but that's just one example of, I think, something else that sort of came out of Envision, that's now kind of getting some focused thought and discernment within our congregation as to how can we best be stewards of God's creation, and what might that look like here at Covenant. Yeah. So we have a few minutes. We'd love to, if you've written down any questions, I can take those, or you can just raise your hand if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to share with our group. Yeah, Mr. Jenkins. I think it's under welcome. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'll stand up so my wife was president of the Women of the Church, where I used to live for 51 years. And the minister and she met one day, and he said, "You need to do something." She says, "I'm not going to do it." "Well, what are you going to do?" She said, "I just hate committees." She would love to hear your report today that some committees do something, because she said she was tired of committees and meeting and talking, then nothing being done. And he said, well, what are you going to do? I'm just going to tell them what to do, and that's that. So he knelt and kissed her ring, and then called her boss from then on.
There's always a need for those folks.
Yeah. Any other? Yeah.
Meeting the needs of access with ADA stuff. What's happening on this plan? The system of definitions as much as we all
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question was focused on our physical property plant infrastructure here. And the question was, if was there anything that kind of bubbled up through the report and or kind of has come to light recently as it relates to our campus?
When we speak to Envision, and then you might know more about some new stuff. Yeah.
Well, I will say just a couple of things along those lines. One, we got a great staff here that's keeping up with our physical plant and its needs. We do have a committee. Was it building
Property.
property committee? That's a standing committee that's always involved. And I'll also say that the staff does a really good job of staying ahead of what the needs are. And, you know, because of our strength as a church and because of the generosity of our members, you know, 2024 was a good year, and we had some additional funds which session set aside as a, what did we call that, Janet? The
A project fund for
project
this
fund.
year. Yeah.
So we have a project fund that was set aside with some of the surplus that we had for 2024, and there's a list of things that need to be done on campus, you know, that we've now have some funds available to take care of those needs. So it's a great point, and it's definitely something that we've got to keep up with. And if, you know, if you're ever here during the week and you see what's going on this campus, you know, with the multiple schools and activities and community groups that are in here using it, it's very important that we keep up with that. So I think Session has done a good thing in setting aside some of those funds while we can to take care of some of these projects.
So that fund is for some kind of what I would call sort of some smaller special projects that might come up throughout the year. Covenant is blessed overall with what's called our Cornerstone Fund, which was an endowment-based fund created when the church was built for major things that might need to be done. And every year, there are projects that are funded through that. You know, last year there was a lot of work done above us in this building from a roof and HVAC and some other things. I think recently you've also seen, you know, there's constant work trying to make the entry of our area safer. It's hard with all the trees to keep the concrete from cracking and buckling, but there's been work, a good bit of work out here. I don't know if you've noticed, there's been some rework of the parking lot right out here, partially to give our beautiful magnolia tree more room for its roots to grow, but also because of the roots, that parking area was dangerous in terms of the cracks. So our property committee and our administration are constantly kind of evaluating, and the big things, roofs, HVAC, things like that, get planned a couple years out. And then we are fortunate to have sort of some more flexible funds to deal with things that come up. I think a lot of our work recently has been trying to improve accessibility as well as some of the hearing and ease of participation in worship options around technology and other things related to that. But keeping the air and the heat and the plumbing and the leaks and the roofs and all of that is no small undertaking. And we're very, like John said, blessed to have both a wonderful staff and a substantial endowment to help support that year over year.
And something that we heard over and over again in the Envision conversations was, how do we use this abundant blessing to manifest our desire to be a welcoming church? How do we use the space even more creatively, so that people drive by and they see something that intrigues them and they go, I want to find that out. So we have been doing more things outside over the course of the past few years. And, I trust and know that there will be more and more of that. How do we really think creatively about the use of our campus and our physical plant as part of how we fulfill our vision? So we heard a lot of that.
And I think one thing that is still sort of an opportunity that we don't know what it might take place is what the impact of the medical school and the other development that's right there. What opportunities will that provide for us, being our steeple is in their shadows. So well, that's an exciting, unknown and opportunity and something for us to pray about as a congregation in the coming year. Any other questions? Well, when we talk about vibrancy of worship, one of those things is what happens in the space at 11 o'clock. So we are going to, we always try to wrap up on time so that this can be transformed into a beautiful space for our vibrant and exciting family worship service in here at 11. So just wanted to thank you all again for coming. And if we could give John, Kim, and Jordan a round of applause for spending their morning with
Thank you all for
us.
coming.
And I wish you all a good rest of your Palm Sunday. Thank you. Really looked inside the angel said